Can you lose fat and build muscle at the same time? What is body recomposition? How do you get the most out of your fat loss and muscle gain phases? And of course, what are some things to keep in mind as you go through those seasons? Because we're going to go with a seasonal approach here. Welcome back to Talking Nutrition. Today, episode 162 on how to achieve as much fat loss and muscle gain as possible. Let's first of all start with body recomposition because it's going around a lot, and I feel like a lot of people are going into their transformation with, unrealistic expectations maybe, and it's not even their fault because it's a lot of content on this. And I want to break this down for you. Now, body recomposition is losing fat and building muscle at the same time, and it is a real thing. It does exist, especially when you're early on in your journey. You're just getting into lifting weights. You're increasing your protein. You're just dialing in your nutrition overall. That combination can be really, really good for people. And especially when we are a bit overweight and we get into those healthy habits, in particular when that's combined, again, with weightlifting, we see this happen quite a lot. Now, when we start our clients off, we don't just jump into fat loss or muscle gain. We kind of help them build healthy habits. We dial in their routines. And that's exactly where we would see this in many cases. It's just not always the case. And I want you to know this. We can see it. And if you experience it, amazing, right? I would love that for you. And I want you to enjoy that for as long as it lasts, because it's not going to last forever. You could also call this newbie gains. And that's maybe a term you might have heard about. And that's really just speaking to those quick results that you'll get in the beginning, very likely. But like I said, it's not going to last. And it's called newbie gains for a reason. Now, before we jump into, there is one other exception that I do have to mention. I don't even like to mention this, but there are, anabolic steroids, performance-enhancing drugs that will play a role there for some people who choose to use that. I'm not a big fan of that, to be honest with you. And the people we help, right, are definitely people who do not need to get into that stuff. That will be maybe something for pro bodybuilders. And even then, you see so many people misuse that stuff and just run into issues and they tank their hormones. It's just overall not great for you. So that's all I want to say about that. Also they would be able to build a bunch of muscle and lose fat at the same time. It just needs to be mentioned, right? Because the whole reason I'm bringing this up for you, even because I wasn't even going to mention this, the whole reason I'm bringing this up is that you are likely following people on Instagram, social media, right, that may actually be on those drugs. And that may actually give you an unrealistic expectation of what's really possible and what's even a good body composition, you know what I mean? Because I think we all do this. And by the way, too, I've followed a lot of people in the fitness space too, and you almost automatically get this picture of I need to look like a fucking superhero, But let's take it back to your journey, because that's what this is about. A natural approach, of course. And like I said, we're going to tackle fat loss and muscle gain in a seasonal approach here. Because after that initial phase of those newbie gains, you're going to want to approach these separately. So let's start with goal setting first. I think that's a good one. Because what your periodization plan is going to look like, those seasons of nutrition, right, in order, will depend on your goals. What's your starting point? Are you overweight? Is that maybe 5 kilos, 10, maybe 20 kilos? Are you kind of already comfortable? You have maybe a little bit of body fat, but it's in a healthy range and you would like to build some muscle? Cool. Let's base our priorities off of that. The vast majority of our clients who start with us will come in with a fat loss goal. And usually what we'll do is tackle that first and then build muscle afterwards. In every single case though, at some point, once we get that weight loss out of the way, because that's how I would like to see that, right? Let's get it out of the way so we can focus on eating healthy, fueling, nourishing. But after that, we always recommend going into muscle gain because it's one of the best investments you can make in your own long-term health and fitness. And it takes a long time, but we'll get to that in a sec. So let's choose one. Think about that for a second, right? Will you prioritize fat loss or will you prioritize muscle gain? Because body recomposition is such a slow process. And I'm going to say this too. It is still possible beyond those newbie gains. But because it's so slow, most people will get impatient because they don't feel like they're getting the results. It takes a really long time. Plus, here's the thing. You can lose more fat within a given time frame if you tackle that first. If you just focus on that, and then you can build more muscle in a dedicated muscle gain phase afterwards, for example. So if you want to see faster and better results, you want to do it separately. So let's start with fat loss. I'm going to assume here that you've been at maintenance and you're kind of good to go. You have some good routines in place. And if that's not the case yet, you would want to start with that first. Make sure you're ready, then jump in. Now, you likely want to kick off with just about a 15 to 25% deficit. So you take your maintenance and you cut those calories. What you want to do with your macros, though, is you want to keep protein about the same. Just about, let's call it like a 2 grams per kilo of your goal body weight. Some people choose to go a little bit higher. We do see that work very well, by the way. That goes for muscle gain as well as fat loss phases. In the fat loss phase, though, it's super key because it's going to be the most filling of your macros to play with. So we expect some hunger. That's going to be there in the fat loss phase, but you can mitigate that a lot by including lots of protein and fiber too, by the way. But okay, so you set your protein target. In a fat loss phase, we take fats to the absolute minimum that you need for hormones, and it's typically going to be like a 0.7 grams per kilo of body weight, and 0.6 maybe if we're a little bit overweight, just so we have that in check and control that as much as possible, again, with your proteins and your fats, so that then we can include as much carbohydrate as possible. This might sound counterintuitive because you've always heard, I got to cut the carbs, right? You got to cut carbs and keep insulin low to lose body fat. Well, not really. Here's the thing. If you create a calorie deficit, and especially that protein is going to be key, but if you create that calorie deficit, you should be losing weight. Now, here's the thing too. With those carbs, you can still get good workouts in. And especially if you're a beginner, this may even lead to some muscle gain. If you're not a beginner anymore, at least it keeps you in a good spot when it comes to your workouts. You get a better stimulus and the body will do a better job at maintaining that muscle that you do have. Because we're not just looking at weight loss here. We're not just at the end of the day trying to be lighter. No, we want to lose fat and build muscle. So during a fat loss phase, maintaining that muscle that you have is going to be key as well. And that's why we keep that protein nice and high and you keep lifting weights. So now that we have those macros set, and if you need more help with this, by the way, I do have a calculator for you. So I will actually drop that in the show notes. I'll make a quick note for myself so that I don't forget. So I always want to drop a bunch of links in the show notes. There we go. So I'll write that down. But you can use that calculator, get a good idea, and you'll start with that. Now, when you're in the fat loss phase, and we'll talk about rates of weight loss and all that stuff in a sec. Like I said, you will be hungry, and I want you to expect to be so. Now, it's not going to be like you're starving all the time, and it shouldn't. And if that's the case, we got to look at food quality. But you would expect some hunger. And this is actually a sign that you are actually in a deficit. It's your body literally going like, oh shit, there's not enough food, right? So stress goes up a bit, hunger hormones go up, right? Energy usually kind of, tanks a little bit down the road, but it drives you to go and look for food, so to speak. Now, we can mitigate the hunger. Like I said, protein is going to be a super, super big one for you. Fiber as well. And I want you to really double down on food quality here. We usually recommend like an 80-20 ratio of whole foods or minimally processed foods versus kind of like anything else. In this case, for a fat loss phase, you want to go 90-10. So 90% whole foods and then 10% flexible stuff. You can still keep that in, and I want you to keep that in if you'd like to do so. But try to really aim for that 90%, because if you are absolutely starving in a cut, especially early on, then that says more about the foods that you are eating. And you can probably do with a bit of, like dialing in your food quality, more fruits, more veggies, right? Now, once that's done, and I do need you to track your weight here and your measurements and your photos. And it sounds like a lot, but we need all this data to make the right decisions, because you're never going to know how many calories you burn. That's just a fact. Like, we're not going to know. There's not a single fitness tracker that will accurately calculate calories burned. No machines can do that. No calculations. At the end of the day, we need to control that food intake and then look at weight measurements and photos so that we can adjust. Because here's the goal. Here's the key, right, to losing mostly body fat, maintaining muscle. You want to stick to about 0.5 up to 1% of weight loss per week. I don't want you to expect to see that every single week, though. It's a general guideline that we want to try to stick to. But we're not always going to be within that range, and that's okay. Let's say you're within 0.5 and 1% per week, and you're kind of, seeing progress, and eventually it stalls. A lot of people will freak out here, but what I want you to do first is look at your measurements and your photos See if things improve, yes or no. If that's the case, awesome. Do not drop your macros further, right? Now, if it's really kind of barely moving at all for maybe 2 to 3 weeks in a row, yes, 2 to 3 weeks in a row, or even longer, then maybe cut your calories again. And if you need more help with this, just reach out to me, because it's very difficult to give like a general, right, do this in a podcast like this, if I don't have any context about your journey. But okay, that's how you make sure to lose fat mostly and then maintain most of your muscle. I want you to know there's likely going to be at some point a little bit of muscle loss, and that's okay. It's going to be very minimal as long as you stick to this, especially if you keep lifting weights, meaning we're not going to rely on cardio to burn fat or burn calories. Like, that should not be the driver of fat loss. Yes, exercise contributes to calories burned, but it's only 5% of your total calories burned. So it's not going to be worth it. Additionally, when you lift weights and you still try to push and you train near failure, you tell your body, hey, we need these muscles. We need to hold on to this stuff, right? Because it has a reason to keep it, basically. You want to do that and sleep well still, and manage your stress. And I'm going to list a couple things here, but like, you want to sleep well, right? Lift weights consistently still, manage your stress. It sounds like a lot, but like, these are all things that will optimize your results. I understand these are things that are easier said than done, and we'll bring these topics back in other podcasts, but look beyond just food and fitness. That's what I'm trying to say. Control your nutrition, both the quantity as well as the quality. Keep lifting weights to hold that muscle, and then optimize everything with your sleep, your stress in a good spot, and then most importantly, I mean, we've been talking about this a lot this month, your steps. I just told you that 5% of your calories burned is exercise. 10% is digestion, but then 15%, which is quite a bit, that is your daily movement, non-exercise activity. Now, this even plays into, blinking, twitching, etc., hand gestures, which you don't really track with a step tracker, but generally speaking, a step count is going to correlate to you moving around, right? That is why we want to keep tracking our steps so that we have a good grip on how much you are moving. If you're currently below 8,000, try to bring it up to 8,000. If you're there already, bring it up to 9, maybe even 10. Now, in some cases, especially further towards the end of a cut, I'll try to push people towards a 12. And in rare cases, and this is people with, active jobs and stuff, we might go for a 14, 15. And by the way, I don't want you to just think more is better here. It's going to be individual. But we keep those steps high so we can keep as much food in as possible for as long as possible. Again, we're not trying to starve you here, right? We're trying to maintain muscle and lose mostly body fat. Now, how long do you want to do this? I would say just about 3 months, 12 weeks for most people is going to be a really solid fat loss phase. You don't have to go that long if it's not necessary for you. And I would also not recommend going much longer unless it's maybe under supervision of a good coach who can really just help you make objective decisions, because in some cases you might actually want to go longer, but that's going to be personal. Keep in mind too that after a fat loss phase, and this will be for another episode, after a fat loss phase, you want to do a reverse diet to take a few steps back up to maintenance and not just jump back, right? Because we see that usually backfire, especially if it's not, controlled, but you want to do a reverse diet too, which is more time in a deficit. So that's why I'm going to say 3 months of active cutting and then a month of reverse dieting gives you a really solid fat loss phase, plus the transition out. Now, let's say, let's imagine, right, hey, we want to go into muscle gain instead. You want to start with a 10 to 15% surplus. So that will be above your maintenance calories, right? Also here, I think most people should probably plan for just about 3 to 4 months of actively trying to chase weight gain. And I'm saying weight gain here because, again, a dedicated muscle gaining phase is going to come with weight gain. Now, we like to not call this bulking, but lean gaining, because here's our goal: gaining as much muscle as possible while gaining as little body fat as possible. Also there, I'll say this right off the bat. If you are in a gaining phase, there's going to be some fat gain with that. Unfortunately, you're going to lose some definition down the road, but it's going to be worth it. I promise you. If we want to build a good amount of muscle, we need to create an environment for the body where it's hey, actually, no, there's enough energy, because muscle, by the way, costs energy to build, energy to maintain. We need the resources for that. There needs to be a good reason, right? good workouts, like lifting close to failure, like all that stuff needs to be in place so that we can build a good amount of muscle. As again, with the body recomposition, for example, it would be so slow, people would get impatient. So expect some gain, but we're going to do this slowly. That's the key. As for your macros, if your protein is already good, keep it there. For your fats, maybe go with like a 0.7, try to keep it low, and then eventually feel free to bring it up a little, maybe like 5 grams at a time, but try to keep that low as well, because again, we are trying to get away with as much carbohydrate as possible to really push for those workouts, so you have a lot of fuel for that, to really recover well, making sure that you also can stick with it by managing satiety. In this case, try to play with foods that are a little bit less filling. Because what I've seen in my coaching practice for years now is people even just having a hard time getting the maintenance, let alone getting into a calorie surplus where we're overfeeding on purpose. This sounds serious, but that's literally what we are doing. Weight gain comes from eating too many calories, or more calories than what we burn. That's the whole goal with a muscle gain phase. I want you to know that. So to where usually at the fat loss phase, we try to play with filling foods, low calorie foods, really bringing up that volume. Maybe in this case, you want to go with less filling foods. Now, I'm not telling you to eat junk. That 80-20 rule that we talked about earlier goes here. I still want you to get 80% from whole or minimally processed foods. 20% though can come from anything else. And I want you to know this because this stuff is always demonized online, and processed foods this and that and blah, blah, blah. Sure, but low calorie foods are not inherently better for you. They're different tools for different seasons. And in this case, as long as you cover your whole foods, 80%, as long as you eat 3 servings of fruits, 3 servings of veggies per day, you get healthy fats in, right? So not just like a whole bunch of saturated fats, but you get your avocado, your extra virgin olive oil, your nuts and seeds, salmon, those kind of things, eggs. You get those whole healthy sources for your foods in general, by the way, right? But when you do that, there is room for flexible stuff. I want you to know that. And it doesn't even have to be like, in quotes, junk food. It can just be something that's a little bit less filling, to where in a fat loss phase, maybe you want to include something like boiled potatoes. There's actual research to show that that's like the most filling food there is, Great source. Now, on the other hand, let's say bread, which is also demonized, but let's say bread, that's going to be less filling, more carbohydrate dense compared to potatoes. That doesn't make it bad. It just means that, hey, in this scenario, it's going to be helpful. So things like bread, tortillas, those kind of things. And by the way, if you have a hard time, you can drink some calories too. Apple juice, orange juice, those kind of things can be great additions. Making a good smoothie, But we got to make sure that if we want to build muscle, we eat for it. We have to. If you want to see that gain, right? Because here's the thing. We're going to aim for gain, but it's also going to be slow. That's why you also got to track your macros here. Like during this whole process, fat loss, muscle gain, you want to track your macros. We'll touch on this in a sec again. But for your muscle gain phase, for your lean gaining phase, you want to stick within just about 0.25 up to 0.5% per week. You're not always going to be within that range. When recently I moved into a muscle gain phase, we just cranked up my calories just a little bit, sometimes like 10 carbs weekly. It would barely move at all. However, I was most definitely filling up. I was most definitely seeing a lot of progress at the gym. So those are things to pay attention to. Are you progressing at the gym? Are you really pushing close to failure? If that's not the case, and you're just comfortably like lifting the same weights, same reps every single week, you will not progress. The whole goal with weightlifting is to progressively overload, to actually see progress on a week-to-week basis. To push, proper technique, right? Get on a program. Super important, because the main driver of muscle gain is going to be that training. So that needs to be in check too. We're not just going to build muscle for no reason. The body needs a really good reason to do so. Again, it's an energy expensive kind of tissue. So again, lots of energy coming in, calories, right? The stimulus is there. We lift weights heavy enough, close to failure. And again, we manage our stress and we sleep well. Rest days are important too. Now this allows you to build as much muscle as possible with very minimal fat gain. But again, you will lose a little bit of definition, especially down the road. 3 to 4 months in, you'll get a little bit more fluffy. And that's difficult, to be honest with you. That's difficult for me. I've been doing this for years now. It's still going to be like, it still fucks with you. You know what I mean? It will still fuck with you. And that's okay. Understand that these uncomfortable situations don't necessarily have to mean that we now have to freak out and just completely, right, oh shit, I got to do a media cut. No. Expect this to happen. Do your best to really train well and rest well and go for that slow rate of weight gain. Because here's the cool part. You'll lose fat way easier than that muscle gain. You can go really slowly, build mostly muscle, gain a little bit of body fat, and then do a cut afterwards. That's where you reveal what you've been building. I mean, speaking of delayed gratification, like that's the name of the game here. A muscle gain phase will pay off eventually. In the beginning, it might feel great. Eventually, you got to get into those things where it's like, oh, I'm getting a little bit more fluffy. You feel uncomfortable. And clothing is fitting a little tighter. Remember that afterwards, you'll want to go into a cut to reveal that. And it doesn't even have to be another 3 to 4 months in that case. And this is assuming that you are moving into muscle gain at a relatively lean starting point. That needs to be set too. Again, like if you need help with this, like feel free to reach out anytime, because it's in a podcast very difficult to just give everyone, hey, do this. You know what I mean? It will not work like that. But generally speaking, expect this. So again, 0.25 to 0.5. Remember that for fat loss, you can go 0.5 up to 1%. Whatever you gain of that little bit of body fat during that muscle gain phase, you can cut off in like a few weeks sometimes even, you see? And then you'll be like, holy shit, like I've been building a lot of muscle. Now I look way more defined. And people always talk about toning and all, definition. That is what it is. Muscle gain, fat loss. So where to start? Like what's your main goal? Is it fat loss? Is it muscle gain? Choose one. It's very simple. Like I would say, and again, I'm very much just giving general numbers here. Let's say you are either at a healthy body fat level, you're comfortable, right? Or you're maybe like a few kilos over that, but you're like, yeah, I'm still pretty good. And by the way, especially if you've been focusing on dieting all the time, why not go into a muscle gain phase for a little bit? First of all, you'll learn how to actually fuel and nourish your body. You've been focusing on so much dieting for so long. Hey, it's a nice change. You're going to learn a very valuable lesson. And by the way, too, like if we are a little overweight, maybe we're just going to do this for a few months, maybe not 3 to 4, right? And then we go into fat loss. You're going to have more muscle. There's going to be more to show, right? You're going to look leaner by the end of that cut. Now, let's say we're 5 kilos overweight or more. Then I would always start with a fat loss phase. Depending on what you've been doing, if it's chronically dieting, those kind of things, we might still have to push for maintenance for a little bit. And we'll talk about maintenance in a different episode. First, to actually get your metabolism in a good spot. But generally speaking, we're going to start with that fat loss before any muscle gain. So choose one. What's it going to be? I think for most people listening, it's going to be fat loss first and then building afterwards. Now, during this whole process, because we're talking fat loss and muscle gain, would it be worth getting a body scan done to really see like your progress? And I'm going to say no. You don't need to. If you have access to maybe a DEXA scan, that will be the exception to the rule. DEXA scans are very accurate. The vast majority of those other ones, they're not. A lot of gyms will have these, or even doctor offices, where it's like, you have this much muscle and fat, they're inaccurate. Especially once you get at home, like the in-body scans or the thing where you like hold the handle, or it's not going to be accurate and it might give you a incorrect measure. And by the way, for a lot of gyms, it's really just something they can have you do. And it shows you, okay, like you're this much overweight for, this much, too much body fat. Okay, by the way, hey, we also sell this, Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason, but it's definitely one of the reasons people have this. Okay, hey, now we can sell you the fat loss program, right? Hey, you now need this, But that's a different story. So please know that these are inaccurate in the majority of cases. If it's a DEXA scan, amazing. Do the DEXA, do it again afterwards, see your progress. I've done it a few times. It's actually great. Of course, it's great to see that change, You also get like bone density, muscle mass, and especially like which areas of your body. But most people will not have access to those measures, and that's okay. I want you to know that. Because either way, it's not going to change the things you need to do to get the results. So focus on your weight, track your average, track your measurements, maybe do that like once every 1 or 2 weeks, and then take photos, maybe, at least monthly. Like with some people, we do this weekly or bi-weekly, but at least monthly. And then with that, you control your rate of gain and loss, you need that data to make those decisions, right? Because again, we're going to be emotional at some point. We're going to make or try to make irrational decisions. And we need the data to kind of be like, hey, actually on paper, like where are we currently at? And then make a decision. And that allows you to get the optimal results. Data is needed for that. And then of course, we didn't talk about maintenance today, which is a very important phase. And you want to spend time at maintenance too. Now, if you want to keep doing fat loss muscle gain, you can do so. That's totally fine. But for the vast majority of people, we're not going to really go into a lot of lean gaining either. So what I would say will be a great solution, for example, is let's imagine we get to a healthy body fat percentage. We do a muscle gain phase. We do a cut. If you're then at a comfortable place where you're like, hey, you know what? Like, I'm pretty happy here. Let's just do maintenance. Either way, you want to go to at least maintenance after every single fat loss phase you do. That's the only way you're going to keep responding to fat loss phases in the future. You can go into a calorie deficit, but then afterwards, you want to be out of a deficit for at least 2/3 up to one time, as long as you've been dieting. You want to spend time feeding, nourishing, like fueling your body enough. That needs to happen after every single fat loss phase you do. Make sense? This is also, right, maintenance. This is also where you can step away from things like tracking and those kind of things. It's probably still good to do it every now and then. But what we do with our clients is, hey, we use the tracking to go through muscle gain phases, to go through fat loss phases, do reverse diets. And in the very beginning, of course, teach them about nutrition and kind of dial that in. We use that as a tool to get optimal results. And then in maintenance, we can step away from that. And then I want you to practice with untracked days, untracked weeks even. Make sense? Because I don't want you to be dependent on those tools either. But know that if you chase a goal, whether it's fat loss or muscle gain, or you're even in a reverse diet, you're going to need the data so that down the road, you won't need it anymore. So to kind of recap, don't chase two goals at once. Pick one, make that your priority. Control things as much as possible. Roughly stick to those ranges, right? So between 0.5 and 1% of weight loss per week in a fat loss phase, between 0.25 and 0.5% of weight gain in the lean gaining phase. Don't worry about the body scans because most are trash. And the objective data, of course, is going to allow you to make the better decisions instead of emotional decisions. To wrap things up as well, understand, because this thing is going around a lot too, right? It needs to be a lifestyle. And that's true. The healthy habits needed to kind of keep you in a good spot, those should be part of your lifestyle. But know that muscle gain and fat loss phases are not meant to be, in quotes, like lifestyle things. There's an end to them. They are seasonal and they should be seasonal. You're not going to just be in a deficit. You're not just going to be in a surplus. Instead, there's a seasonal approach to this. You want to make sure to target these goals separately, transition out of fat loss phases into maintenance, go into maybe muscle gain phases, but also don't spend too much time there because we will gain a whole bunch of body fat down the road. And remember just to go back to maintenance, because if we're talking like, hey, making it a lifestyle, and let's imagine you just want to maintain your good, then go to maintenance and make that your goal. And that's really the only place where you can stay and just kind of live life. Now, there is research that shows that it is objectively healthy to be in a calorie deficit, let's say yearly, right? Not for the majority of the year, but like every now and then. Seems to be beneficial for your blood markers and stuff, insulin sensitivity. So you'd still want to consider doing that every now and then. However, life is lived at maintenance. And that would be the only really lifestyle phase to be in. And you can stay there as long as you want to. Fat loss, muscle gain, it comes and goes. That being said, I think there's one more thing I need you to know. And that is that it will always come with sacrifices. You're always going to have to practice some type of restraint. In a deficit, definitely. But even in a muscle gain phase, you don't want to get too comfortable with those calories either, because a lot of people will be like, oh, I just have this many calories available now. Great, amazing. Controlling your calories is even more important during muscle gain, because if you gain too fast, you gain more body fat. You see? In a fat loss phase, if you eat too much, you just lose less fat. In a muscle gaining phase, you gain more body fat. So there's going to be more work down the road to cut it off. So also there, you still got to control stuff. Don't get too comfortable. Don't get too flexible. Both will come with trade-offs in terms of maybe weekends for your fat loss phase. Maybe the short-term trade-off is that, hey, we are going to look a little bit less defined towards the end of a muscle gaining phase. knowing that, hey, once we reveal it, we will be leaner, right? That is also a short-term sacrifice for that long-term benefit. So keep that in mind. Both will come with their own roadblocks, their own kind of like mind fucks. But remember that as long as you take this seasonal approach, you can always get the maximum amount of fat loss out of a fat loss phase, muscle gain out of a muscle gain phase. And then if you just want to chill, go back to maintenance. And that is it for today. So if you want to keep learning, I'd love to invite you to our free Facebook group. I'll drop it in the show notes. This is where we post exclusive content, resources. I'm actually building a whole bunch of things in the background, so I want to share that there first. We're going to do challenges, presentations, and much more. So if you'd like to be a member, go to the link in our show notes. Free to join, no strings attached. And of course, thank you for listening. I'll talk to you very soon.